think we're doing it. We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. We're going team by team.
I would be very careful about slinging stuff.
Am I going to get sued?
We got legal on this?
Let's send you out on the right note. PFF sucks. Have a great day, everybody.
Wow.
Welcome into the PFF NFL podcast for Monday, July the 8th, firmly in the off-season season for everybody, which means ranking season for pretty much everybody. I'm Sam Monson. Obviously, no Steve here today, but that means we get the great Trevor Sikkema in his chair, not our chair, but his chair to do the pod. How's it going, Trev?
Going good. We're talking about how, I'm keeping the hat tradition of the podcast, the recent tradition alive.
Yeah, very recent.
I don't have a giant scar on my head because of it, but I wanted to still bring the Steve vibe to the show today, so I felt like I should wear a hat.
That's a nice tribute, a salute to our fallen hero, Steve Palazzolo, fallen to a printer apparently. I believe he's still up and running, by the way, like he's just away in Boston or wherever he goes. But the printer got him. Printer got him, and or the coyote was, I think, what we decided was a better story. Anywho,
wait, hold on, wait. You guys could have fabricated any animal, and you just came up with coyote?
Well, I went for plausibility. Coyotes roam the streets of suburban Cincinnati, right? You could be defending the kids from a coyote. Like you could go with a tiger or whatever, but I think it's a much smaller chance of that actually happening in the streets of wherever he lives.
Now you got to go bigger. You got to go. We were vacationing in Florida with the kids. There was an alligator there. Yeah. The alligator came, and I had to one-on-one the alligator to save my family. And then after I beat the one alligator, then five more alligators showed up, and then it just continues to get crazier.
We tend to think of coyotes though as these little tiny fox-like things, but they can get big and wolf-looking.
They're nasty.
When I visited my parents in this place in Connecticut, and they live near a wolf sanctuary for some reason, right? So I took Scout there, wolf sanctuary. Anyway, we're sitting there, and there's like a little educational thing at the start. Here's a little lecture about wolves. And then you get to the Q&A part, right? And there's always an idiot, right? So this lady pipes up behind me, and she's like, they literally just finished. The sentence had ended where they said, there are no wolves in New York State, in Connecticut. There are no wolves in this general area. And this lady pipes up and goes, we live in an area with a lot of coyotes. And then every now and again, you see this big coyote that looks a lot like a wolf. What do you think it is? I'm going to go out on a limb, lady, and say it's a big coyote. That's my guess. Before I'm going to let me take a guess before the expert answers. I'm going to guess it's a big coyote. Let's turn it over to our expert. And then she's like, yeah, what you saw there was a big coyote. They look like a wolf sometimes. Anyway.
Hey, she had to know. She just it was a burning question. We all would have asked it. Every single one of us could have asked.
That's a long way around to saying, look, a coyote can be a mean wolf-looking thing. It's not necessarily this tiny little fox. It's just it can be nasty.
That's true. No, it is very true. Very true. R.I.P. the Phoenix Coyotes, by the way.
At least
which
nasty.
Is now the
Utah, they moved to Utah or something, right?
Hockey club. I don't even know what they changed the name to.
Yeah.
But I know that was on when they were switching teams, when the Arizona Coyotes were switching teams to Utah. That was on the table to just be called the
hockey club,
the Utah Hockey Club.
Yeah, why not?
No, we need to do away with that. Soccer, it's an epidemic. Okay. Come up with a real mascot. I'm tired of this football club thing. I'm tired of the city and then FC. No. Yeah. Hire an actual marketing firm, do some work, and come up with a badass, unique mascot. That's my take.
But that's
my boomer take of the day.
In soccer, that's like tradition, right? Like it was just this football club of the local area. So it was just,
It's just lazy.
Maybe. I think they also just it never occurred to people working down a coal mine in the 1920s that you needed like a badger as your mascot. They're like, why, what? I don't understand. It's not compute. I literally don't compute where you're going with this. This is, Accrington Stanley's coal mining football club. Like, why do we need to invoke like a unicorn? What are we doing here?
See, now it's my goal to come up with a small town team in New York or Connecticut and name it the Wolves.
Yeah, the Wolves.
Yep.
Yeah.
Full circle right there.
All right, before we get into today's show, as opposed to Wolves and mascot ideas, as parents, we all want our kids to grow up, be happy, successful, and financially independent. With a UGMA account from Fabric by Gerber Life, you're arming your child with a powerful financial tool to help shape their journey towards financial success. It's all online, and setting up an account could take just 5 minutes. With as little as $1 a day, then you can manage your child's UGMA account and monitor all their investments right from your phone. There are no contribution limits, multiple tax advantages, and they're SIPC insured up to $500,000. Plus, no commission fees and just a low, flat monthly maintenance fee. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. MEET, fabric.com/PFFNFL. Portfolio is managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors, Inc. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Monthly minimum contribution required. Learn more at meetfabric.com. Almost got through the terms and conditions without stumbling. Almost did it. All right, Trev, today our topic du jour is going to be some of the rankings that have been going up on PFF.com over the last few weeks, essentially the best units in the NFL. You and I have each written some of these rankings pieces, so on the articles where we've written them, obviously our rankings are the same as PFF's. But in other rankings, we'll each give our top fives and break them down from there. Sound good?
Sounds good. Wait, top threes.
Top three, you're right. Top three.
Okay, all right. I just needed to know if I needed to, panic make them up on the fly of these other two. I'm just gonna put the Bucks at 4 for literally all of them.
Right. No, that's fair. That's my misstep. Good clarification. All right, we want to start with the offensive line?
Sure. Yeah, we can do that.
All right.
You want me to go first? Am I just naming off my top 3, just kind of talking about them, and then we'll throw it back to you?
Yeah, so anyway, all these rankings, there's actually a big umbrella article over there at PFF.com, best units in the NFL, where you can see a link to all of the individual articles and break off from there and go through them. But yeah, let's go with the offensive line. What do you think are the top 3 offensive lines in the NFL heading into this season?
Sure. So Zoltan wrote this article of the top offensive lines in the NFL. He had the Detroit Lions at number 1, Philadelphia Eagles at number 2, and then the Indianapolis Colts at number 3. Mine is similar. I agree that I think the Detroit Lions and the Philadelphia Eagles are in this top 3. But then my third is the Atlanta Falcons. I think the Falcons' offensive line is awesome. And, Chris Lindstrom, anybody who listens to this podcast and, follows the work of PFF and sees our data over the years, they've seen how good Chris Lindstrom is. He's one of the highest graded players, not even just offensive linemen, players that we've had in the league over the last couple of years. So, with him on this team at right guard, that's a spearhead there. Jake Matthews at the offensive tackle spot, Caleb Ngary at the other offensive tackle spot. Drew Dahlman at center. I think certainly his run blocking grade really helped elevate this unit last year. And then I was a big Matthew Bergeron guy coming out of the draft a couple of years ago. So I still think that he's going to continue to get better and better. And when you look at Atlanta and even what they just did last year, like you could take away I think this unit's going to get better. I think that they're going to improve. Last year alone, Atlanta, 21.5% pressure percentage allowed, of course, because it's offensive line. That's second best in the NFL. So in pass blocking as a unit, second best in the NFL when it came to mitigating pressure against. And then when it came to positively graded run blocking plays, 82.4%, which is extremely high, second best in the NFL. So this team was really good in pass protection when it came to not allowing pressures, and they were phenomenal at run blocking, earning positive grades almost more than any other team in the NFL. So to me, it's a unit that I had to put them in the top 3 because of the success that they had last year and even how much better I think that this group can get. So I got the Detroit Lions, the Philadelphia Eagles. I think those are sort of obvious ones. I think that you're going to have both of those in your top 3. I'm intrigued if you don't, but then Atlanta is my third team there for my top 3 offensive lines.
Yeah, I think Atlanta has a very good offensive line. I do worry a little bit that it will be not exposed, but its job is going to be harder this year, right? Because they're pivoting away from effectively the most run-heavy offense in the NFL. They're going to a more conventional scheme. They're going to be running that kind of Sean McVay scheme, which is not One of the interesting kind of divergences, I think, between McVay and Shanahan and their coaching trees, or at least I assume their coaching trees, but certainly their schemes, is McVay's doesn't protect the offensive line the way Shanahan's does, right? Like Shanahan, every offensive line that plays under a Shanahan offense looks better than it actually is, I think. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have great players there, right? Trent Williams is still probably the best left tackle in the game, maybe the best offensive lineman, period. But they have weaknesses on that offensive line, and you rarely see them actually turn into problems within the game. And usually those guys play significantly better in that scheme than they do anywhere else. McVay's offensive lines actually tend to really influence how the offense goes, and they don't seem to get protected the same way. Anyway, long way around to saying this is now running a McVay type of offensive line. I'm going to assume their job is more difficult next year, particularly from a pass blocking standpoint when they're doing it more often. So I would expect that line to take a little bit of a step backwards, even if, you're right, guys like Bergeron could take a step forwards by just development. So they're not in my top three. My third best team, overall, I had the same order with the top two. Detroit, number one, Philadelphia, number two. Yeah. The Eagles have been the best offensive line in the league for the last couple of years, but they've got turnover now, right? They've got to replace the greatest center, arguably, of his generation, and Jason Kelce. It's a little bit of an unknown for the first time. My third team, though, is the Cleveland Browns. I still think that's a really, really good offensive line. The interior is solid at worst. They have three starting caliber offensive tackles, so they've got depth as well. That's a really good group.
Yeah, and they were down, all three of those offensive tackles at one point last year, right? I mean, like Jedrick Wills was hurt, Jack Conklin was hurt, DeJuan Jones was hurt, and Cleveland was basically right there. To be honest with you, it was between Cleveland and Atlanta, and I think if you wanted to say, hey, Cleveland's proved it more, I have no problem with you having them at number three, especially because Teller and Bitonio could very well be the top two guards in the NFL when it comes to guard duos in the league. So good tackles when those guys are healthy, one of the best, if not the best guard duo in the league. And then Ethan Posick obviously is somebody who can get it done at center as well. So this is a really strong group, and they have been for a long time. I wonder what Cleveland is now going to be like with Bill Callahan no longer there, right? Because he goes over to Tennessee. His son's now the head coach there, so he moves over to the Titans, which I'm excited for the Tennessee Titans because their offensive line was terrible last season. I mean, it was really bad. And so you are hoping that you get, at the very least, the coaching bump to where, let's just say, for argument's sake, Tennessee's got the worst offensive line in the NFL. I don't know if that's the case, but I think they're in the conversation, certainly on paper. Let's just say they have the worst offensive line in the NFL. If Bill Callahan can get them to 20th alone, then okay, that's a massive jump for you. And Callahan was the offensive line coach for the Cleveland Browns. He's been one of the best offensive line coaches and just longtime coaches in the NFL for a long, long time. So I'm curious to see what this offensive line looks like without him. I don't think they're going to magically be bad, but just something to think about.
Yeah, the residual effects of those offensive line coaches are always interesting. Like bringing the guys in is great. You get that and that coaching bump potentially for Tennessee. But the flip side of that is how long does his impact last in Cleveland after he left, right? Does that linger for a couple of years and you sort of retain the teachings of Bill Callahan? Or is it like the second that guy's out the door, the whole thing unravels? Like we've seen that before with Dante Scarnecchia in New England, right? When he left, the whole line fell apart pretty quickly. And then he kind of, they got him back because the thing was a disaster without him.
Right.
So, yeah, I think those guys are – there might not be a position coach that influences on-field product more than those really top-tier offensive line coaches. Let's move to the second rankings, receiving core rankings. So this is basically anybody that catches a football, right? Wide receivers, the obvious ones, but tight ends, running backs are in this bucket as well. At PFF, the official receiving core rankings were San Francisco number 1, Miami Dolphins number 2, and Philadelphia number 3. Now, you wrote this article, therefore your rankings are the same.
Correct. You ruined my moment there. I was going to be like, it's me, Austin. And it's like, all right, well, that's going to be the rankings there. But no, so This is a really fun exercise to do, receiving cores. There's a lot of different ones, and there's a lot of different ways to, I think, look at pass catchers depending on how much weight you give the wide receiver room or the tight end room or running backs, right? Sometimes I'll have this different conversation with people, and I'll look at the 49ers are a bad example. I wish Christian McCaffrey was kind of elsewhere so I could use that example, but it's like, okay, Philadelphia, this is the better one. When you look at Philadelphia, do you say, yeah, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and you go, Saquon Barkley, he's a little bit of an addition? Or do you go, look at what Saquon Barkley could be as a receiving running back, right? I mean, like, you probably think of the same years ago when it came to Alvin Kamara, right? Where are you ranking the Saints? Because do you weigh him heavily? And some people look at running back or tight end additions for receiving core rankings, and they're afterthoughts. Like, they're just little bonuses. I don't necessarily think that they're little, especially for the teams that emphasize these players a lot. So for San Francisco, again, they're the top team, and it's so very obvious that they're the top team because they've got 2 top 10 wide receivers in Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. Even if Brandon Ayuk gets traded, they have Ricky Pearsall, they have Juwan Jennings, and then you go to tight ends, it's George Kittle, and you go to running backs, it's Christian McCaffrey. Like, it does not get better than that. San Francisco is just an embarrassment of riches that they could pass the ball to. So they're far and away number 1 in my opinion. I do have Miami at number 2. There's a lot of, I think after San Francisco, you can honestly argue almost any team. But in my opinion, Miami has the strongest argument to be that number 2 team simply because they have the most feared wide receiver in the NFL. They have Tyreek Hill. He's coming off a 94.0 receiving grade season. He's basically uncoverable. Any cornerback that lines up against him, it's just, he has the advantage. He has the advantage against all of them. Jalen Waddle himself is running mate there. He had an elite receiving grade as well last year. And then you get to throw in Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane, who just their speed alone could be fantastic in the receiving game. So you're not getting a lot from tight ends, but even though it's top heavy with just their top 2 wide receivers, Miami is so good, so dominant. I had to put them at number 2. And then the 3 was tough because I think there's a handful of teams that you could really argue with number 3. I mentioned the arguments sort of start for number 2, but again, Tyreek Hill really, to me, puts Miami ahead and in that number 2 spot. But number 3, you can go with a handful of teams: Houston, Chicago, Philadelphia. There's a ton of different options that you can make arguments for. I landed on Philadelphia simply because of the well-roundedness of the room, including the running back position, bringing back Saquon Barkley up to the conversation. Barkley has not been as efficient, as explosive as a receiver as he was in 2018 during that rookie season. And I think that changes this year. You look at Philadelphia and how successful they've been with 2 different backs, Miles Sanders 2 years ago, DeAndre Swift last year, both very successful players, and they were both willing to get the ball in their hands in different ways. Saquon Barkley's better than both of those guys. So I think that he's going to be a major part of this offense that already has a stud wide receiver 1 in A.J. Brown, a really damn good wide receiver 2 in Devontae Smith, a good tight end in Dallas Goedert, right? And so I think a lot of that is there for Philadelphia, and the well-roundedness of where Jalen Hurts can go with the football put them at number 3 for me.
Yeah, it's always interesting how you weigh like the top tier talent that a team has and how you weigh the depth, right? Because I think Philadelphia's top tier talent is as good as anybody's. Those 2 wide receivers, Dallas Goedert, Saquon Barkley, but their depth gets weak quickly. Like I mean, if either one of those receivers gets hurt, next man up is like a total question mark for them and could be a huge problem for them over the course of the season. So for me, obviously, number 1 was the same, San Francisco. We both agree that's not even a conversation. Number 2 for me was Houston, and number 3 was Chicago with the additions that they've made this offseason. Houston, I think, is a much easier argument. I think that the depth that they have is so clear that I think they are maybe not the clear number 2, but a really good, strong case for number 2. Like Nico Collins with that breakout season last year, phenomenal. Stephon Diggs, I think they're bringing him in. Okay, he's only a rental, but he's still really good. Like last year, the second half of last season, I don't think was an indication that he's just done. so Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell coming back from that injury, like their numbers 4, 5, and 6 wide receivers are admittedly a shell of the former Robert Woods, Noah Brown, who's a really good like number 4 receiver, John Mechie, and that's before you get to guys like, Ben Skoranek, who can do things in the NFL. Like, they've got players. Dalton Schultz at tight end. Now Joe Mixon, like, okay, he might not be what he used to be, but Joe Mixon is a good quality receiving running back as well. So just the array of weaponry that they are now able to deploy across the board, the depth, like they might be legitimately unrivaled when it comes to depth.
When I was doing this, I had Houston at 5, and Houston was one of those teams where I didn't really think about them beforehand. And then you go, oh yeah, they got Stephon Diggs. And then you go, oh yeah, and they got this guy. Oh, and they got this guy. Oh, they have Dalton Schultz. Wow, they added Joe Mixon. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, you cannot keep them out of the top 5. So 5 to me is basically the floor of where you can have Houston in a receiving core rankings going into the season, in my opinion. I think the key for them is actually Nico Collins. Collins' incredible year last season. If we get last year's Nico Collins with Stephon Diggs still there, with Joe Mixon now taking some targets in the receiving game, with Tank Dell coming back and hopefully being fully healthy, like, is Nico Collins still going to be able to be dominant? And I think the word that I would rather use is efficient on probably less looks. If that's the case, yeah, absolutely. I could see this team being right behind San Francisco when it comes to just overall fear that they strike in secondaries and defensive coordinators' minds, the overall production that we're going to see in the statistics. But to me, it really is. I think Stephon Diggs is still going to be really good. I like Tank Dell as a wide receiver 3. Schultz is going to be solid. Mixon, like you said, at the very least, he's got that volume experience to be leaned on in a lot of different situations. If Collins is in the same conversation of as good as he was last year, this year, yeah, this team's going to be really, really good.
And then Chicago, I think, now has a really impressive group. Like, obviously, DJ Moore was already there. The 2 additions at wide receiver of rookie Rome Odunze and Keenan Allen in free agency. That now gives them potentially 3 legitimate high-end threats, pending what exactly Rome Odunze obviously does in year 1. But they have depth as well. Like Cole Kmet at tight end. They added Gerald Everett at tight end as well, who's still a threat. Out of the backfield, you've got 2 guys that can catch the ball, DeAndre Swift and Khalil Herbert, pretty well. They've got a lot of depth in addition to just like the star power up front. Like, this is one of the best groups of weaponry in the NFL for Caleb Williams to work with right away.
So I have them at number 4. So we're not far off in these conversations that we're having here. 2 calendar years ago, Ben Lindsay wrote the article of receiving core rankings in the NFL heading into the 2022 season. Chicago was 32nd. They were dead last in the NFL going into the year, and boy, did they deserve it.
Yeah.
Darnell, I'm just reading the blurb right now. Darnell Mooning was the only wide receiver that was even like remotely a threat that they had on the team, because outside of him, it was Byron Pringle, Velus Jones, Equanimous St. Brown, Tajay Sharp. I mean, the 360 that Ryan Poles has done with this offense in 2 calendar years is unbelievably impressive. It has to be one of the biggest jumps we've ever had in rankings in a 2-year stretch, from what they were able to do when we saw them in 2022 to what that offense looks like now. So it's just, it's worth bringing up. I know we brought it up before, but it is worth bringing up again, the change that Chicago has done, because I completely agree with you. Even though I did not have Chicago in my top 3, they were number 4. They were right outside of it. And you could certainly make an argument for them being top 3 with all of the solidified talent. I mean, 2 star veteran receivers in DJ Moore and Keenan Allen, and Cole Kmet seems to only be getting better. And Gerald Everett's still got some stuff left in the tank. And then you throw in Rome Odunze, which it's not too crazy to say, like, Rome Odunze could be the best receiver of all those guys, even this year. Right. So that just tells you the talent level that Chicago has.
It's always worth bringing up because, we just judge quarterbacks sometimes in abstract terms. But, like, when you're 2 back-to-back sort of first-round quarterbacks for Chicago, Justin Fields and Caleb Williams, Justin Fields was given the first group to work with, right? And Caleb Williams is being given the second group to work with. Like, this is not an even playing field these 2 guys are working from. Now, Caleb Williams is a better prospect, I think, than Justin Fields and may presumably will end up being a better quarterback. But let's not pretend they had the same situation to work from when we're judging them. Like, this is important context when you're judging these quarterbacks. When I mentioned the depth thing before, I'm not suggesting they belong in the top 3, but how do you rank or credit a team like Green Bay, who don't have like an elite number 1 threat, but have insane depth? Like, everybody that they've got on that roster is a threat. They're just not. There's no Devontae Adams. There's no Justin Jefferson.
Right. And it's kind of funny. You asked me that question, and I think my immediate response to answering that question would have been, well, I still take a lot of depth like high into account, because it gives you the opportunity to have somebody step up every single week, which is something that we saw Green Bay do. But then when I actually look at my rankings, because I wrote this article, I have Green Bay at 14. And 14 seems low for the Packers, given the just true depth of talent that they have. But to me, you still, in my opinion, need that top tier guy. Like, I think that having a wide array of players to be able to go to is obviously good. And perhaps it works out into your favor because, you give yourselves multiple options to, okay, whichever receiver is hot this week, we're able to lean on him as our, wide receiver 1, if you will. But I still wonder, there's so many times when I watch guys in this league, whether it's Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson or Tyreek Hill or Devontae Adams or whoever it is, those guys at the very top, when you need a first down, when you need a drive-setting catch, when you need to move the chains, when you need to get into the red zone, when you need to score, there is that wide receiver that you consistently look for who's going to deliver for you. And I'm not saying that Green Bay doesn't have that player, but clearly in my rankings, I guess I subconsciously thought a little bit differently than I believed I would. I'm still waiting for one of those guys to really step up and have that title in Green Bay, though I do believe that person is still on the roster.
All right, our next rankings unit, the running back rankings. So this is interesting because most teams in today's NFL are using some kind of backfield by committee, but there are still a couple of teams who are still like basically funneling everything through a true traditional old school workhorse. So, and this is another one of those rankings that you wrote, again, to spoil the surprise. So the official, well, you can give the official PFF ranking since they're yours.
The San Francisco 49ers are a cheat code. That's what I've learned, like, doing all of these exercises is it's pretty crazy. And actually, it actually only increases the lore of Patrick Mahomes that he has fended off the Niners from winning a Super Bowl as of late, because this team's unbelievable. And obviously I talked about them having far and away the best receiving core in the NFL. I think that's the same with the running back room, right? Christian McCaffrey is the most valuable running back in the league. They also have Elijah Mitchell, who we've seen to be an effective back when Christian McCaffrey has not been in the lineup. They also drafted Isaac Guerrero, who I think is a really high upside RB3. You throw in Pro Bowl fullback Kyle Juszczyk, and there's just no weaknesses here. It's exactly what you would want from a modern running back group. I've got the Miami Dolphins at number 2, Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane. These guys had elite rushing grades last year, 91.7, 93.1. They had the most explosive runs of 20 yards or more. This was a rushing offense that, like Mike McDaniel and Chris Greer have wanted to do, they want it so whoever we get the ball in their hands, whether it's Tyreek Hill, whether it's Jalen Waddle, whether it's Devon Achane, whether it's Raheem Mostert, whatever, they can take it to the house. Like, those guys are an explosive play waiting to happen. And I think that the combination of those two guys is fantastic. Then you throw in Jalen Wright from Tennessee, the rookie that they drafted this year, a back who I really like. It's the same mold, it's the same flavor, and I think he is going to be able to contribute in similar situations over the next couple of years. Finally, rounding out the top 3, it's the Detroit Lions. And the Detroit Lions, again, I talk about, man, doing these exercises, it makes you appreciate how good of a team San Francisco is. It's the same thing with the Lions, honestly. We talked about them in the offensive line group. They were, without question, a top 3 offensive line unit that you and I talked about there. Receiving core, we didn't have them in the top 3. We didn't talk about them in that last ranking section, but they're right there in the top 8 for me. I mean, like, this is a group where certainly if Jameson Williams in particular takes that next step, that unit's going to be really good. Amon-Ra St. Brown's already a stud. Sam Laporte is already a stud. Like, they've got players on that team. And then when you go to the running back specifically, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, they were, as a group, top 5 in rushing touchdowns, missed tackles forced, explosive plays of 15 yards or more, and total rushing grade in 2023. And that is going into 2024. We think Jahmyr Gibbs is going to get even better. At least I certainly do. I think he's going to be even better this upcoming year. So if they were top 5 in all of those categories last year, I think they could be even a little bit better this year. So those are my top 3 units: San Francisco 49ers, Miami Dolphins, Detroit Lions.
Yep. My first 2 are the same. San Francisco, number 1, Miami, number 2. Like, all 3 of those Miami running backs, Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane, and Jalen Wright, they all run sub 4.4. Like, that is a track meet of a backfield that Miami have assembled there. And then my third team is the Atlanta Falcons. That combination, like, obviously Bijan Robinson, I think all of us believe is a special running back talent. But the sort of but the reality there is, like, he's been splitting time with Tyler Algier because Tyler Algier is really good.
Yep.
Like, it's a shame for the Bijan stock, but Algier's a really good running back in his own right. And then they grabbed Jace McClellan in the draft, who I really liked as a talent as well, as a running back 3. So he's not moving the needle a huge amount, but it's a nice little bonus in there as your RB3 in that backfield. I think that Atlanta backfield is really nasty as well.
Yeah, they were 5 for me. The Ravens, I had at 4. So, adding Derrick Henry to that group. I didn't include Lamar Jackson.
Right.
In the spirit of, okay, we're talking about rushing offenses, you could throw him in the back of your mind. But if we get a fully recovered Keaton Mitchell, and it's kind of a 1-2 combination of Mitchell and Derrick Henry, to me, that puts this group firmly within the top 5. If you're saying that, hey, Mitchell's coming off the ACL tear, I'm not really counting him as a factor. It's just Derrick Henry. We're not counting Lamar Jackson. Okay, you could put the Baltimore Ravens outside of the top 5, but the way that I look at this team is Lamar is part of the rushing attack. And definitely. I certainly hope that Mitchell gets back to form, because he was a lot of fun when we saw him in the limited role that he was in last year before he broke out and then he got hurt. So all of those factors, I kind of cheated a little bit and wanted to put Baltimore in the top 5, because if all those kind of come to fruition, then I think they're going to be really good.
I mean, I definitely had mental asterisks next to Keaton Mitchell, next to Nick Chubb. Like, those were such significant injuries, and late in the season in one case, that you're like, okay, if he's the same guy again, it definitely changes things. But at the moment, I don't think you can just assume that based off the injury that they had. You talked before about how insane the San Francisco roster is. We did an exercise a while ago that was kind of fun, where you have to come up with the best 3 players on each team, right? Just the top 3 players, regardless of position. Mm-hmm. And some teams, you're getting to like player 3, and you're like, we're kind of already out of options, right? They've got 2 stars or 1 star and a really good player. And they're like, there's a few options that are reasonable. San Francisco, it's ridiculous. Like, they have the best player at their position at multiple spots. And you're like, do we leave Nick Bosa off the team as the top 3 players in San Francisco? He might be the best edge rusher in football, and he might not be in San Francisco's top 3 players, right? Or Debo, or, it's insane. They've got the best left tackle in the game. They got the best running back in the game, arguably the best edge rusher in the game, the best linebacker in the game. That's before you get to Debo, who's a unique weapon without, comparison. George Kittle may be the best tight end in the game, and a guy like Brandon Ayuk, who's an elite receiver, is like, forget about it. You're not even in the conversation for the top 3 players on this team.
It's ridiculous. Off the top of my head, doing that exercise, Bosa, Fred Warner, Trent Williams. Right. Those are my 3 that I would settle in on. But it's asinine.
Right.
To actually, the San Francisco 49ers are actually doing everybody a favor, because in the off season, there are some podcasts and shows. We've done this before on Stock Exchange and some shows that I've done in the past. Anybody who listens to Lockdown NFL Draft, we used to do this, where we will start an expansion team. I think you guys have done this as well, where like you protect like 4 or 5 or whatever it is, like players on every team, and then everybody else goes in the pool, and the expansion team gets to pick from like the non-top 5 players on every single team. San Francisco is doing everybody a solid because the expansion team is going to come away with George Kittle,
with an offensive
Christian
player of the year,
Deebo Samuel. It's basically just going to be the Niners B team.
Yeah.
Is how you're going to look at it.
No, it is ridiculous, the embarrassment of riches that they've got. All right, next rankings, defensive line. This is one where I was the author. So the official PFF rankings, a.k.a. mine. The New York Jets, number 1. San Francisco, number 2. And then Philadelphia, number 3. And this is another one of those interesting breakdowns between like depth versus star power, right? Like the Jets have a ton of depth. The Eagles have a ton of depth, albeit less proven than it used to be. And then San Francisco are the opposite, where theirs is driven by basically 2 absolute superstars in Nick Bosa, who we just mentioned, and then Javon Hargrave on the interior. Sure, they've added Leonard Floyd as well, but basically 2 guys are driving that ranking versus the depth that the Jets or the Eagles have.
So I came up with 2 of the same for the 3. I have the Jets. I think that they're the best defensive line basically until proven otherwise. Right? Quinnen's a stud. Jermaine Johnson's only getting better. You're adding Hassan Reddick for Bryce Huff, which I think is fine. Obviously, Reddick's even had more success. Maybe not as efficient, but more success in the backfield. You got Will McDonald as well. You add Javon Kinlaw. You're kind of taking a chance on him there. So this is just a really good unit, and the Jets are the best defensive line, in my opinion, until they're not. I have the Philadelphia Eagles in here as well. Unproven, sure, but the talent ceiling of the Philadelphia Eagles is still so high for me. Like, I think this is a huge year for Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis. Like, I think they are going to become one of the best interior defensive line duos in the NFL. So I'm expecting them to get even better this year. Then you throw in Bryce Huff, who's had an above 20. I think he's been above 22% pass rush win percentage in each of the last 2 seasons, which, specialized roles, right? They're only putting them on the field kind of in these specialized pass rush situations, but like 22% pass rush win percentage is Nick Bosa, it's Myles Garrett, it's TJ Watt, like kind of stuff. So even though it's streamlined, and I think he'll be playing a higher volume role, so that's going to go down naturally, he still knows how to get after the passer. So I think that's great. Obviously, you throw in a guy like Josh Sweat. They've got Nolan Smith as well. I still think that this is a really strong unit in Philadelphia. And then the third team for me was not the San Francisco 49ers. And it's kind of because of what you said. I look at Nick Bosa, I look at Javon Hargrave, but then I like Leonard Floyd, but then it's like Malik Collins, Yetur Gross-Matos, Jordan Elliott, Drake Jackson. You mentioned it. Those 2 guys, Hargrave and Bosa, are basically carrying this group. And I think it's a good group, but when I look at what the Detroit Lions have, I like that group better. Aiden Hutchinson, DJ Reader now, the year Aleem McNeil had last season, Marcus Davenport, if he's fully healthy, which I know is an if, I think that he could be a really solid second defensive end opposite Aiden Hutchinson. You got Josh Pascal as well. You got James Houston still on the team. You've got John Kaminsky. You've got some guys in depth. Like, I like Detroit's defensive line, even though it is not as star-studded as the one in San Francisco with their top 2 players. It's not that far behind. And I think they're a lot deeper than San Francisco's unit is.
Yeah, no, they definitely have more depth. It really is like, how much do you value? Like, Nick Bosa is, let's say, as good as any pass rusher or any edge rusher in the NFL, right? The top of that tree, I think, is a movable thing every year between him, Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, Micah Parsons. Like, any one of those guys could be the best guy at any given year, but I think all of them are at that level of they're as good as it gets. He's at that level. Aiden Hutchinson's at like the next tier down, which is still insane, but isn't quite as good as Nick Bosa. Maybe he gets there this year. Like, he's still getting better. I think Javon Hargrave is certainly, as a pass rusher, is a better player than either Reader or Aleem McNeil, but the Lions have both of them, right? And then, like, at this point, as much as Marcus Davenport's got great potential and stuff, like, at this point, it's I mean, he's not moving the needle any more than Leonard Floyd is for me, based off where he is at this point in his career. So they definitely have more depth, particularly when you factor in guys like James Houston. But I think like San Francisco's peak is definitely better with those players. So it really is like how you value those truly elite guys versus the depth that you can bring to the table.
Yeah. I think Cleveland's also intriguing in this group, in this conversation. Obviously, you have Myles Garrett, who's just a true freak of nature. They bring back Zadarius Smith, which I think was big. They've got Dalvin Tomlinson. So, like, I think that this Cleveland defensive line is also a really good one.
All right, linebacker rankings are next up. And this was Gordon McGinnis writing it, so we can feel free to absolutely dump on these rankings as, clearly incorrect and not ours. The official PFF rankings from Gordon were number 1, the New York Jets, number 2, the San Francisco 49ers, and number 3, the Chicago Bears.
I have the Niners at number 1. I won't not put Fred Warner not at number 1, and especially because Dre Greenlaw, I think, is obviously phenomenal as well. I think fully healthy, they've got the best linebacker 1 in the NFL, and then probably the best linebacker 2 in the NFL. So I put them at number 1. I know the injury kind of clouds that for Greenlaw, but
right.
They also have Devondre Campbell as well. So I think that they've got good linebacker depth as well as star power talent at the top. So they're number 1 for me. You can make an argument for the Jets at number 2. I'll put the Jets at number 2. I mean, Mosley and Quincy Williams, as Gordon notes in the article, very good last season. They were good in coverage. I mean, they were a reliable linebacker duo. So I think that you could certainly give them the nod there. And then I went with just an overall linebacker unit. I went with the New England Patriots here for my number 3 team. You got Jelani Tavai. He played a really good season last year. Juwan Bentley, I think he's been really steady for this team over the last handful of seasons. You signed Sion Taki as well. So it's not like any of these guys are inflicting so much fear into the minds of offensive coordinators. But I think as a whole unit, the Patriots have a pretty strong, steady, and high floor linebacker group. And honestly, man, that's if you don't have like a Fred Warner at the very top, having a really high floor is great for linebackers. Like, do exactly what you're supposed to do. Have your job, do it well, and allow the guys in front of you to really get after the quarterback and the defensive line. Allow the secondary members behind you to get a little bit more aggressive in coverage because they've got a lot of faith in you and what you're doing in the middle of the field. And I think New England's got a have a lot of faith to what you're doing in the middle of the field kind of a unit. So I have them at number 3 simply because they've got a lot of different guys that do their job really well.
Yeah, I'm basically I'm almost steering clear of anything to do with New England's defense until I see what it looks like sans Belichick's. You know what I mean?
It's fair.
Irritatingly, I actually agree with most of Gordon's rankings here. I have also San Francisco number 1. I also have the Jets number 2. I think the kind of starting caliber players that they've got there are really good in both instances. My number 3, though, is Jacksonville. I think that pairing of Foye Oluokun and now Devin Lloyd, who's sort of bounced back from his rookie struggles, that's become a really, really good duo. Like the talent, Oluokun is just one of these insanely active linebackers. Kind of like, you remember when London Fletcher used to just be around the ball every single play? Only The difference is, like, Oluokun's actually making defensive stops as well as just making those tackles 6 yards downfield, which London Fletcher, did a lot of. And Devin Lloyd is just insane athlete for his position. And they've got, Chad Muma, who I think is a useful player as well as a backup. So I think that's one of the most active and impactful overall linebacker duos in the league.
I didn't think about putting the Jags in my top 3, but it is a unit that I like that I probably could have put in a top 10 that, I mean, it's a young group, certainly with Muma and with Lloyd. Those guys continue to take steps forward. Oluokun continues to play well. Like, they can certainly move up the rankings. I didn't think about them in my top 3, but they are names that I like. So I do, at the very least, like the shout out there.
Nice. All right, let's round it up with the secondary rankings written by John Costco. So the official PFF secondary rankings, number 1, the New York Jets. Number 2, the San Francisco 49ers, 2 teams that have been in these rankings a lot. And then number 3, the Buffalo Bills. So where were you on the secondary rankings?
Yeah, I wish I could get down with the Buffalo Bills, but I can't do it anymore. I feel like they've lost too much. They're too unproven.
Yeah, I don't have that one either.
I was gonna say I don't know if I'm spoiling it or if I'm calling you out here, but my top 3 secondaries, New York Jets, I still have it number 1. Sauce Gardner's the best corner in football, right? I mean, DJ Reed might be the best CB2 in football. Michael Carter's a really great nickel player. They get Chuck Clark back. I know they lost Jordan Whitehead, but I still think that unit is really strong, and certainly the corners I think is one of the strongest in the NFL. Number 2 for me is Miami. They have the CB1 in Jalen Ramsey. They have a really good slot player in Kader Kohu. I like them bringing in Kendall Fuller to play on the outside opposite Jalen Ramsey. They have Javon Holland, who I think is a really good safety. And now they added Jordan Poyer, who's a fantastic veteran safety as well. And Marcus May is on this team.
Yeah.
Like, this is a really good secondary that, I don't know, maybe is not getting enough credit that it deserves going into the season. So I got Miami at number 2. And then this one's a projection a little bit. I've got Baltimore at number 3. They've still got Marlon Humphrey. The year that Kyle Hamilton had last year was Defensive Player of the Year worthy. They've got Marcus Williams. They have Brandon Stevens. But then it's their draft that also really gets me intrigued with this team. Having Nate Wiggins, having TJ Tampa. They drafted Bo Braid from Maryland as well. They still have Ardarius Washington. Like, this is a group that me having them at number 3 might be a little rich. I feel like I can get away with it because of Kyle Hamilton and Marlon Humphrey alone. But those younger guys that they drafted, I'm really excited about. And if any of those players can really hit the ground running and be contributors, I think this is a really strong secondary group.
No, I agree. I think it's a good group. We match in our first 2. I obviously have the Jets number 1 as well. I also have Miami number 2. I thought I was
Let's go.
Thought I was kind of going out on a limb there, but you're right. Like, the strength of that group is actually crazy. They've got Ramsey. They bring in Kendall Fuller. I still like Cam Smith as well as a depth player at corner there. And then that safety group with Javon Holland, Jordan Poyer, Marcus May. It is a really strong secondary. The third team that I had, though, was the Cleveland Browns. And I think we saw last year, like, just how strong that group is once you put a defensive line in front of them. Like, they got lit up a couple of years ago because it was Myles Garrett and nobody else. And then last year, you suddenly give Myles Garrett some help, and you see the talent that they have. Obviously, Denzel Ward, incredible corner. Greg Newsome is really good. Martin Emerson has become an amazing player for them. Grant Delpit at safety is a good player. And then you've got, the depth of Juan Thornhill, Ronnie Hickman, Rodney McLeod is there. That's a really strong group.
Yep. That was the other team that I thought, because once you get past whoever your fourth team is, like if it's the teams that we had here, like I don't know if you would throw Baltimore at number 4, but me having Baltimore at number 3, Cleveland would have been my number 4. After that, you start getting into discussion about like a lot of different secondaries in the NFL that I could have a case, because normally it's like, okay, it's a stud, or it's just a team with a high floor, maybe a low ceiling. So there's a lot of different directions that you can go with secondary rankings after this. But in my opinion, Cleveland was easily my fourth team, could have very well been my third team, because you're right, that cornerback group alone is so strong, much like the Jets have at number 1.
And then I feel like this is the case for basically every unit on this roster, but Green Bay feel like a team that I'm not saying they should be in the top 3, but there's definitely a world where they play like that this season. Like the range of outcomes for Green Bay across the board because of that young roster, I think seems to be incredibly big. So they've got this group where, like, the top end, we've seen Jair Alexander play like the best cornerback in the NFL. We've seen Eric Stokes play at a really high level. Keyshawn Nixon in the slot, I think, is a really good player. The depth is good with Carrington Valentine, Corey Ballantyne. They added Xavier McKinney as their big money, free agent splash. They've got some depth there now. Javon Bullard, coming in as a draft pick. Like, it might not all come together, but there's definitely a world where that group plays like an elite secondary.
Yep. No, I agree. Green Bay would have, at the very least, I think, been in a top 8 if I was doing this article. But I think the longer you look at this group in Green Bay, the more you can easily convince yourself they could be really dang good this year.
Right. So that's all the rankings that we're going to go through today. You can go find the rest of them at pff.com, find all of the stuff that we've been talking about. There's no easy way of transitioning into this, but I guess we have to cover a couple of bits of NFL news. The most obvious being the Vikings rookie cornerback Kyrie Jackson dying tragically in a car accident. That just a brutal accident to not just, I think 3 people died in that accident, Kyrie Jackson and 2 of his friends, from what sounds like a drunk driver basically swerving, changing lanes that took them all out.
Yeah, I believe it was Jackson, and forgive me, I don't know the names of the other 2, but I believe one of them was a former Florida State football player. The other one was a former University of Charlotte football player. Obviously 3 friends, and it's just unbelievably tragic. Just cannot say this enough to people out there. Just please do not drink and drive. Like it is one of the most selfish, dangerous things that you can do. And you just read stories like this, and it's gut wrenching, man. It's just absolutely gut wrenching to hear. So I Ubers and Lyfts, I know, like, sometimes it may be expensive, maybe you think it's too far away, whatever the price is, whatever the situation, it's not worth drinking and driving. So please always be safe doing that and make that decision, because it can obviously be life or death, and it can avoid a lot of tragedy like that one that we had to read.
Yeah, absolutely. It's responsibility at this point. Like, we all know, don't do it. Like, there's not an excuse. If you can, like, just if you can't afford the Lyft or the Uber, don't drink, right? It's
don't
pretty
drink.
simple.
Right.
Those are your 2 choices, right? You either get the Lyft, get the designated driver, figure some way of getting home, or don't drink and do it yourself. Isaiah Hazel and Anthony Litton Jr. were the 2 other people. There were all 3 of them were high school teammates as well. So horrible tragedy there, and really just sad to see for him, for everybody involved. Also sad news, but not quite as tragic and devastating. We got to give a little pour one out to the Around the NFL crew. Do you see that podcast is being shuttered / rebranded / whatever is happening there?
Crazy, man. Dan, Greg, Mark, I mean, Chris being, part of that group as well, obviously a pillar of that group. I mean, I tweeted this out after I read Greg's thread about the podcast being no more. They're a pillar, man. Yeah. I mean, they've been doing this a long, long time. You and Steve have been as well. And like, I consider so many of those kinds of podcasts like pillars of the industry, because the league has evolved so much since 11 years ago when Greg said that they started their show. And what year did you guys start y'all pod together? What year did you start?
It's not 11, probably. Maybe. So it's funny. They always felt like our kind of bigger brother in a way, like in podcast world, because
I'm sure for a lot of people they felt like
because I think we started similar kinds of times, but obviously, being from the NFL with the TV backing and stuff, like they were always ahead of us, and always a bigger show. But so comparing yourself to like Pat McAfee's a waste of everybody's time, right? Because the dude's just like a stratospheric numbers, like it's silly, right? But they were always like just attainable, like they had bigger numbers than us, and they were significantly a larger show, but like close enough that it made sense to at least model yourself on them or compare yourself to them, and it was doable. So we always kind of viewed those guys as our like bigger cousin, bigger brother podcast, and like an absolute institution, like they built a monster over there.
It's sad, man. It's sad that the NFL is deciding to go in a different direction. I read that Greg's taken over that feed, and they're rebranding it into sort of more of like a daily podcast, a little bit shorter, more of a daily thing, and he's going to spearhead that. So obviously I know he's going to kill it. He's been one of the best in the industry for a long time, and that's going to continue. Dan and Mark, I saw, aren't doing podcasts with NFL anymore. I know they're going to land on their feet. Obviously, they're phenomenal at what they do as well. But it stinks, man. It's just that there's no way around it. I get it. It's the industry. You're changing. You're evolving. Things don't last forever. But man, the fan base that show had, the uniqueness that it was, how much you could very much tell that those guys just turned on the microphones and not only talk football, but had a lot of fun together. Those are the shows that are great. They're the ones that not only are educational, not only are entertaining, but, make you laugh, make you connected to the hosts and to the rest of the listeners and everything. And it just felt like around the NFL did that. So I know that the people who watched and listened to that show for more than a decade are going to continue to follow those guys, as we all are. But yeah, so I mean, it's sad that the show is ending, but holy cow, salute to an absolute monster that those guys built. I mean, they set out to have a show that made a difference and went the distance. And even though it's ending, they can very confidently say that they were able to achieve those two things. So salute to them, man. Incredible job by those guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Incredible show. It became an institution. Their fan base is as, if not more, loyal and rabid as ours is, and substantially bigger. So incredible job by those guys. And hopefully they all end up, landing on their feet and going on to bigger and better things. Just a shame to see such an amazing show change, right? Like shut down, change, evolve, morph into something else, however you want to describe it. But incredible run, and we're sad to see it go.
Yep, indeed.
All right, guys, that's it for our show today. I will be on Thursday with Dalton, not Trevor, not Steve. We will talk to you then, and until then, take it easy.